Hello and welcome into the Lettermen Lounge Recruiting Podcast. My name is Mick Walker from Lettermen Row, and this on the other side of the screen from me is Steve Wiltfong, the On3 Vice President of Recruiting and Transfer Portal. Today we're going to get into some recruiting reactions from Ohio State winning the national championship. But before that, Steve, I know you were tuned in. I know you're not a big fan of the super late kickoffs, but I imagine you were tuned in for most of the game. And what did you think of how Ryan Day and the coaching staff for Ohio State handled that game?
7:30 kickoffs. I got no issue with those probably more of like a 7:45 kick. We had a little 2-hour delay the next day that we were notified early from school because of negative temperatures here in the Midwest. So it all came up at the Wiltfong house. Kids were able to watch the game. And that's really why I bitch about the times of kickoffs, because I got young kids that like to watch the biggest games and everything's kind of catered to adults. So kids got to watch the game. The stars were out and played well. And obviously Ohio State wins its first national championship in 10 years. They were the team that won the first 4-team playoff. Obviously, now they're the team that won the first 12-team playoff. If I'm Buckeyes fans, I'm like, let's get to 16 next year. We'll do that next year and run this back to back. Look, they took a shot from Notre Dame, some gut punches from the Irish on that first drive. Capped off by Riley Leonard, putting Notre Dame in the end zone. But Ohio State obviously responded with 3 straight scores in the first half, then one in the second half. Balanced attack, 231 passing yards, 215 rushing yards for Ohio State. Notre Dame responded. We knew they would. I mean, they responded from the loss to Northern Illinois, had the nation's longest winning streak coming into the game. They got good players over there. They responded, but then, when Ohio State needed a response at the end of the game, third down, go ball, Jeremiah Smith, the best player on the field, a field shared by a lot of future pros. He makes the play. Ohio State has the confetti coming down on them. Ryan Day gets the Gatorade shower, and the Buckeyes, another championship. And they were the best team. They were the best team coming into the season, in my opinion, but nothing is guaranteed to you being the best team. They faced some adversity, some challenges, and they responded to it. They had the toughest playoff slate of any team in the 12-team field that advanced, and they beat a good Tennessee team at night at home. It avenged their loss to Oregon in the Rose Bowl in resounding fashion. And then they beat a good Texas team and then beat the Irish in the championship. So if you're Ohio State, you're excited about this win and enjoy it, soak it in. How are they celebrating there in Columbus?
So in Columbus, there will be a celebration on Sunday. I believe there's a little thing going in the stadium. I don't know if we've heard parade or yet, but I believe it's going on in the Horseshoe. And as Steve and I will kind of touch on later, they're already working. I know James Laurinaitis, for one, is already working on some in-state guys because of the late notice that'll hopefully be down there to take part in that. But for anybody that wants to come celebrate on the Lettermen Lounge message board, you can sign up now. Get your first 7 days, $1. Spencer will have a ton of coverage. Alex will be there helping out. I'll have some more recruiting coverage. And Steve had a great story this morning Steve was talking about his kids watching the game, where one guy that I guess is technically a kid by law, but is built like a grown man, is Jackson Cantwell, the 5-star plus offensive tackle out of Nixa, Missouri. Steve spoke with him today, and he seems to be very interested in Ohio State. That's the vibe I've gotten. I think that's what Steve kind of reported on this morning as well.
Well, I think when he looks at Justin Fry, Ohio State's offensive line coach, he called him as underrated as anyone in the country at his job. I don't know how you could even, he is certainly one of the premier offensive line coaches in the country, always has been, going back to his time at Boston College. But he talked about Ohio State's postseason run, and he's in the weeds with Ohio State's football team, knowing the changes that they've had up front, the things they've had to deal with. He said Justin Fry, what he was able to do with guys that normally wouldn't play is incredibly impressive, especially when you take into account the caliber of opponent that Ohio State was playing over the last month of the season. Obviously, 4 playoff teams, 4 teams that were good enough to win the national championship, in my opinion. And so he certainly feels like he could get developed by Justin Fry. He likes the culture of the program, and he likes the style to play in the Big Ten. Yeah, Nick Sahai, they're a run-first program that likes to control the tempo of the game at the line of scrimmage. He talked about having a great head coach, great OC, great offensive line coach, and they're perennially in the playoffs. So, like Jackson Cantwell, he is now in track season where he is trying to do some historic things as a shot put and discus thrower. And then he's going to try and line up his official visits. And Ohio State's trying to get one of those four. And in today's new age of recruiting, I mean, Jackson Cantwell's one of the most coveted players in the NIL space, too. You're going to have to invest to get him. But I also think he's going to have an old school blue-collar approach to his recruitment. Missouri's certainly in the middle of this recruitment. They cannot be counted out. I think he's got a great deal of intrigue in Oregon. Had really good visits to Ohio State and Michigan in December. Was just back down at Texas A&M. Miami is a program that should be viewed as well more than a dark horse in the Jackson Cantwell sweepstakes. But Ohio State, he's watching them. He's talking to them. He loves the position coach. Said great things after their win in the semifinals. Said even more great things after their win in the championship game. And now it's about getting them back to campus, showing them what you can do for them on the field, showing him that you are able to pay him his value off the field. And that's not something that I think he's asking a lot of questions on. I don't think it's like, some of these recruits, they come into their recruitment and every time, what's the number? 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 It gets annoying. I mean, Jackson Cantwell's got representation with Rosenhaus. You can't have better representation than he does on the high school level. Maybe some are as good, but obviously they're a historic sports agency firm. They're representing him. They can handle that. And he can handle the who's going to be my offensive, where am I going to be comfortable? In fact, he actually, at the Under Armour game, his agency was like, look, just find the places that you're comfortable and everything else will take care of itself. So like I said, blue collar recruiting approach, but there's certainly going to be some value involved in this with this talented young man on the back end.
Yeah, Steve mentioned it there. Jackson Cantwell throughout the whole Ohio State run here has been responding to all my messages, all my interaction. Definitely has picked up contact. All the in-state guys, Max Riley, Sam Greer, have also stayed in contact and been impressed with the offensive line's performance in the playoffs. The other guy that I think you included in your story, Steve, and I know Ohio State is very interested in, is Darius Gray, the 4-star, almost 5-star type of guy out of Virginia, who Ohio State visited during their prior to the national championship game. And I know he's very interested in Ohio State, and he told you about that same thing.
Yeah, he's been gushing about Ohio State all 3 times I've talked to him in the last month. LSU's in there, South Carolina, Oregon he wants to get out to, Michigan, Penn State, he's going to visit there in 2 weekends. But Ohio State's in the middle of that one for Darius Gray. They're in the middle of it for Micah Smith out of Vero Beach, top 100 offensive lineman that's already visited 6 times. He's going to come up in the spring for 2 days and just kind of shadow and watch spring practice and watch how Ohio State develops and works with their offensive linemen over a couple days span and gets them prepared for the season. But I would say Ohio State's the front runner for Micah Smith right now. Miami, Oregon, South Carolina, some of the other major contenders for Micah Smith.
You mentioned Oregon, and there's one that's one of the main schools trying to pull Chris Henry Jr. out of Ohio State's 2026 class. Them in Texas, obviously you and I both know winning games this season does not have a great impact on what Chris is going to do, but it does help the Buckeyes having beaten 2 of his other two of the other schools he's highly considering, and you got to see him this past weekend.
Yeah, I spent some time with him. Man, what a just ferocious individual. Right there. He's one of the more imposing wide receivers I've seen in high school in my time doing this over 2 decades. Look, recruiting's a game of inches. You never know how they're going to add up. So beating Oregon, beating Texas, being the national champs just continues to remind him the caliber of play that this football team's going to have. And Ohio State, when you're talking about teams that are consistently in the top 10 year in and year out, they are right there as much as anybody in the country over my 42 years of living. So they're just consistently good, consistently one of the best teams in football. I think the way that Ohio State prepares their wide receivers is what stands out to Chris Henry Jr. Look, if Ohio State's recruiting you, you're obviously a special talent. Your wife and my wife could probably get a lot of these guys, they're just draftable players. But what stands out about Brian Hartline is the intricacies that he can teach them of the game that not many people have in the tool bag. Just what he knows about the position, and then how he's able to communicate that with his wideouts, and then how it's able to show up in their preparation on the field, teaching them how to be a pro, teaching them how to practice, getting them ready to be, when they get to the next level, to be instant impact players. And so I think that that's what attracts him to Ohio State. And he says it's going to take a lot to flip him from the Buckeyes. Look, he's obviously keeping some other schools warm. He's going to be at Oregon this weekend, LSU, Tennessee, Texas A&M, some of the other schools he mentioned. When I spent some time with him this weekend, they all got things they can sell. But Ohio State, not only the offense, the winning, but how Brian Hartline gets you prepared to be a pro. And then the success that these guys are having on the next level. They're not just getting drafted. They're the best players on their respective teams. And so I think, obviously, Ohio State's got a lot to sell. It's up to other programs to say, hey, might be still a better situation for you over here. But he was fired up about Ohio State's win in the championship. I talked to him on Saturday. Then I talked to him again on Tuesday morning. So he's excited to be part of the Buckeye class. And even though he doesn't have a visit scheduled with Ohio State, he wants to get back soon as well.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Brian Hartline as a developmentor. Him and Chris also have a very tight relationship that it's hard to fully articulate. Offered him in 8th grade, so that's another big thing. But you mentioned it, Steve, working on Tuesday morning, late Monday night to kind of get this story together. Again, I'm not going to give the whole thing out. $1 for your first 7 days. You can read all the reactions from Steve, from myself, Chad, Alex. Everybody will have recruiting coverage, but you talked to probably 20 different guys. I know I talked to 20 to 40 as well. What were some of your reactions, some of the guys that you spoke with, that if you feel like the Ohio State National Championship really caught the eye of?
Well, these guys were already watching. They're already excited about Ohio State again. You just never know how the inches are going to add up. So just seeing the caliber of program that Ohio State is, how they were so ready to play in that game. No moment too big for them in this playoff push, the way they responded to the tough loss to their rival at the end of the season. It's just resonating with these guys. Aiden Harris, I mean, he said, he goes, I told you weeks ago, them boys were on a mission. Obviously, he was absolutely right. He's someone that I have an on-3 RPM in favor of Ohio State for. Albert Hill, he's the number 1 player in the state, number 1 corner in the country. Oregon, Texas A&M, Alabama, Tennessee, Michigan, some of the programs trying to convince him to leave home. But just the resiliency of this football team, he said it shows you can have ups and downs, but never settle for less. And he's happy for everybody. And he knows what we talked about the receiver tradition at Ohio State, but there's a lot of DB tradition. I've talked to Albert and his dad, Rock, about that numerous times. And so, obviously they're in it for a lot of offensive linemen, in-state recruits like Sincere Johnson, 4-star linebacker. And Ohio State's board, it's going to be fluid. There's guys that we think are at the top of the board right now. There's going to be new guys that emerge for Ohio State as they get on the road. They haven't been able to do much recruiting and much of a live evaling of these 2026 prospects because they were busy winning a title. So they didn't get to go out and see if length was real, if hand size was real, if ability to bend was real, get a few minutes around a kid. Do we like his personality? Do we like his, get around people in the school? They didn't get to do that as much as some of the other schools because of the way the season was set up. There's guys that are out there in 2026 that eventually could become top targets for Ohio State to help them win their next championship that we're not even talking about right now because they didn't get a chance to really go out and fine comb this class.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, again, the coaching staff didn't get to go out. Mark Pantoni, Nick Murphy, Parker Ward, Brian Mayhew, some of these guys in the recruiting department, they were out on the road. They got to see some guys. But, again, it's not the same as Ryan Day walking in with the suit jacket and the national championship pendant and walking in, shaking a coach's hand, getting to meet with the player, getting to do home visits. So that'll start happening later this week. I believe that's when some of these assistant coaches will start hitting the road. Again, I think some of these in-state guys will come down this weekend when the celebration. I know some invites have already been kind of sent out. But if we could circle back on, you said position tradition at a wide receiver and defensive back, but the other one where there's a lot of is linebacker. And one of the guys that gets to kind of lead that now is James Laurinaitis, who's a big part of the tradition. And He is now recruiting the number one linebacker in the 2026 class, Tyler Atkinson. I got to see him while we were down there in Atlanta. He spoke really highly of Ohio State, got to chat up his dad, and he really liked James Laurinaitis. What did you think about what he told you kind of after the game and where his recruitment's headed?
Well, the best thing about James Laurinaitis is that not only is he an Ohio State legend, but he's an approachable Ohio State legend that does a good job of recruiting. He just genuinely seems to enjoy talking to these kids and telling them how Ohio State could be of service to them on the next level, and truly believes that he believes in what it did for him and what the school and program can do for these kids. So Tyler Atkinson, look, he's taken a lot of visits to Georgia. I like where the Bulldogs stand early in this recruitment, but I think Ohio State's one of the biggest challengers. And he talked about the resiliency. This win showed resilience, never outworked mindset. Big ups to the Ohio State players and coaches. He just likes the way they believe in themselves there. He certainly, helped Grayson win a state championship this year. He thought that they were overlooked in state in the preseason, counted out by many, but they rallied as a team and got it done. And he feels the same way about Ohio State. He's been up to campus before, certainly fits in at Ohio State. I mean, these recruitments are wars, and you pick your spots and where you want to try and win them. And so, but Tyler Atkinson is one of Ohio State's top recruits, and he spoke highly. He spoke highly of him after the win over Texas. He said, "Look, I knew it was going to be a defensive game, and it was Ohio State's defense that got it done in that ball game too." So he's been watching closely.
Yeah, and the Buckeyes are pulling out all the stops there. James Laurinaitis is recruiting him. Larry Johnson has a good relationship. Ryan Day, obviously. And even he got to spend about the Indiana game when he visited the whole Saturday. He spent it with Maurice Clarett by his side. So, I mean, who better to spend it with a guy that gets to kind of impart some wisdom? And we'll wrap it up on this here, Steve. You were down in Miami this weekend, fighting off a little bit of your cold, get down to some warm weather. And a couple of the guys you got to see were some Ohio State commits. Brady Edmonds threw the ball down there. Jameer Brown, I saw you post and catch some touchdowns. What did you think about the commits and the Ohio State targets you saw down there at Battle Miami?
Yeah, well, Brady Edmonds is obviously a big kid with a lot of traits of the upside that could really power that football down the field. Confident guy that I thought saw the field well when I watched him play. And then Jameer, he can make that splash play. And one of the best plays of the weekend, went up and caught the football in the back of the end zone, landed in bounds for 6. Showing the kind of ability that he has. And you got to be an electric player to get on the field at Ohio State, and he's got some of those qualities.
I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for joining us again. Like I said, folks, $1 first 7 days. Get you everything Steve writes for Lettermen Row, everything Steve writes nationally. So if you want to keep up on what the team up north is doing with their recruiting, if you want to follow Oregon recruiting, because there's a lot of Ohio State-Oregon battles, Steve will have you all covered. $1 first 7 days. You get to read all of that. I will see Steve here in about a month when we meet up at our Best of the Midwest camp in Indianapolis. Once again, yearly tradition. I think lunch is on me this time, but Steve got it last year, so we'll see how that goes. Steve never lets me buy lunch, but I appreciate Steve coming on. We'll have him on again here in the offseason, guys. As things get rolling, we'll have Steve more on because now this is recruiting season, and there's nobody.
Sign up for Lettermen Row. We'll see you on the Lettermen Lounge. It is the premier place to get your Ohio State information ahead of the curve. Thank you guys for having me on. Congratulations on your national championship. And it's going to be fun covering the Buckeyes on the trail in 2026.
No better place to get recruiting coverage than with Steve, Chad Simmons, Pete Nakos, all the people here at On3. Again, $1 7 days. Thanks again for joining us, Steve. And we appreciate you joining the Lettermen Lounge podcast.